Let me, while colleagues of mine are still working on the setup, let me introduce what we are going to see today. So I will give you a brief introduction or about what can be the applications of TMS-EG, which comes from the combination of transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, with electroencephalography, EEG. Then I give the floor to Silvia Casarotto, who will give you a short overview about the procedures you must comply to in order to have reliable TMS evoked potentials. And then we move to the real live session, where we are going to stimulate different spots on cortex and look in real time how the TMS evoked potentials look like. And also we will go through possible issues like the appearance of muscle artifact, the appearance of an auditory evoked potential, and so on and so forth. So this we put a lot of effort in this event, and actually 3 labs are represented today. We come from Milan, Maria Rosanova, Silvia Casarotto, Simone Russo, and Sasha D'Ambrosio. Then there is a second lab. I don't remember all your family names. I remember only the head, let's say, of this group, which is Kevin Caulfield and Alex and Philip. And they come from Charleston, MUSC. And these guys were trained by a former colleague of ours, which is Matteo Fecchio, who is now working at MGH in the group of Brian Edler in Boston. Okay, so I always like to remind first myself that the very first study where neurophysiologists at New York University recorded the first TMS evoked potentials. This very early study, where they were using a coil on one side of the brain, they were recording the EG on the other side. I always like to show a little paragraph from the method section, where they say exactly what we are going to show you today. So, during delivery of stimuli, the MC, meaning the magnetic coil, was progressively tilted towards the horizontal until the response was elicited, and then carefully rotated to yield minimal stimulation artifact. Additional stimuli were then delivered at surrounding sites at approximately 1 centimeter intervals until an optimal response was recorded from contralateral homologous scalp. Okay? So this is exactly a summary of our approach to record TMS evoked potential. In this case, however, the evoked potential were recorded on the other side of the brain because of technical limitations. So these guys were using a traditional amplifier that was affected by a large, under the coil was affected by a large artifact, and a saturation that was basically covering the brain response for seconds. Okay, but we know that the brain is responding for half a second, so the response was covered here. Then Finnish engineers, headed by Risto Moniemi, were able to craft an amplifier which was fully TMS compatible. In this case, there were virtually no artifacts, and you can record the response under the coil, as you will see today, immediately after the pulse. And with this equipment, today we're going to use another EEG amplifier, which is fully compatible with TMS. These are technical details, but the bottom line, the message is you can today record EEG responses to TMS and see them in real time right after 8, 9, 10 milliseconds. Okay? Then, using this approach, Marcello Massimini, this is the first study in which TMS EEG was used in the lab of Giulio Tononi to show how the response of the brain is changing while the subject is awake here, and 15 minutes later, keeping all the stimulation parameters exactly the same, how the response is changing. So this speaks for a change in the brain state and not in the stimulation condition. We have also shown that by stimulating different cortical modules, you get different responses, slower in the back of the cortex and faster in front. And this has also some nice application, had also some nice application again from the Giulio Tononi's lab. Then we have shown how the response when you stimulate the motor cortex changes in terms of time frequency when you evoke a motor evoked potential, or the motor evoked potential is very small or absent. Okay? Then we have shown with TMS EEG that you can track the cortical excitability while applying TDCS, in this case was anodal TDCS, or while administering L-DOPA in Parkinson's, patient affected by Parkinson's disease. Then we have applied TMS EEG in deep sedation and anesthesia, and we have also crafted, thanks to a brilliant theoretical physicist called Adenauer Casali. He's a Brazilian, now he's professor at Sao Paulo University, that worked with us many years to develop an index that is able to capture the complexity of the TMS evoked potential in different situations. And here there is a paper in which Silvia has shown that you can clearly distinguish between different consciousness conditions and brain states, and you can classify patients with disorders of consciousness based on this index. And these are very recent studies in which we were able also to longitudinally track the changes of TMS evoked potential, while one of these patients affected by disorders of consciousness was recovering consciousness, and some relevant features of the TMS evoked potential were paralleling this clinical evolution. And then we have shown, together with other groups, specifically particularly in Germany, that you can apply TMS EEG in stroke patients, and both of us, the two groups, have shown that if you stimulate close to the lesion, you get weird response, which reminds, by the way, the response we have recorded in deep sleep, in anesthesia, and in the vegetative state patients. But if you move on the other side, you get, say, normal response, okay? Normal TEP with positive and negative. This is the preserved part of the cortex, and positive and negative components that last for 300 milliseconds. Importantly, if you stimulate on the lesion, thanks to the neuronavigation, you don't get any response, being all the other parameters the same, and also the sensory pathways stay there. So this speaks for genuine nature of these responses, meaning they come from the cortex that has been actually activated by the TMS. And of course, by looking at the response you have in stroke patients, you can also envisage a way to find a target where you can, for instance, apply RTMS in order to get these areas that are actually sleeping in an awake brain, get back to wakefulness, and maybe again to contribute to cognitive functions. Now, all this is very nice, but it requires careful steps, methodological steps, in order to rely on what you are seeing. And what is nice is that, and I hope today we are able to convince you about that, you can, in real time, while you are running the experiment, you can already have a look of the TMS evoked potential and an idea of, look, it's a unhealthy area, it's structurally preserved, but it returns sleep-like response, or something is wrong, or so on and so forth. But so there are several procedures and several steps, but the crucial part is a graphic user interface that allows you in real time to spot the cortical area and see whether the response you are recording is specific for that area, meaning that, let me zoom in here, meaning that the responses are larger under the coil. So if you are stimulating on the left side of the cortex, you get larger responses there. If you move on the right side, you get larger response on that side, and with a good signal-to-noise ratio. And if you follow this approach, something is wrong here. Okay. These are 4 targets recorded in our lab in years, and it's a premotor cortex, parietal cortex, occipital cortex, and you can see on the right side, well, the waveform is different in the 4 cases, and also the topographies generated by the TMS pulse are different as well, and specific for the side, for the stimulated side. Silvia, your turn. So I give the floor to Silvia, and she will go through these procedures that we are going to apply today to show.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you very much. Well, today, before you came, we started early preparing the subject. So we carefully prepared the skin because we need to lower impedance to have very good impedance when we run TMSG experiments, because otherwise there might be artifacts related to the charge of capacitances that are created between electrogel and skin interfaces. Then we already did a titration of noise masking. You know that when a TMS is delivering pulses, there is a coil click which is generated by the current flowing within the coil. And so this sound stimulates the brain from a sensory point of view. And we have to mask this click in order to prevent the occurrence of spurious components related to auditory low potentials. Now, during the experiment, we will need to perform a real-time evaluation of EEG responses to TMS. This part is very important because we will perform this real-time visual inspection by using a dedicated software tool. We have implemented the software tool in a MATLAB environment, and it's actually compatible with different EEG amplifiers. But we have been able also, thanks to the collaboration with the Nextim company, to integrate a more packed version of this software tool within the navigation software of the stimulator. So we will see all this graphical user interface on that screen directly. And in this display, we can see not only single trial EEG responses to TMS, but also average EEG responses to TMS in real time. And both these display modes are very, very useful, because if we look at single trial EEG responses to TMS, we can in real time adjust TMS parameters such as orientation and intensity to get a response which is free of artifacts, in particular muscle artifacts. If we look at average EEG responses to TMS in real time, meaning that we look at the average of the first tens of trials, let's say 10, 20 trials, we can immediately check what Mario was highlighting before, whether early in time after the pulse we get a large response, a measurable response, which is larger close to the stimulation site as compared to distant channels, which has a left-right asymmetry in amplitude coherent with the stimulation site, and is large enough to survive statistical analysis when you compare pre- and post-stimulus periods. Okay, I think, well, I just show you here like a brief example because we will better see everything in real time. So if you cannot visually inspect single trial EEG responses to TMS with this kind of software tool, you may deliver hundreds of pulses, then you go home, you analyze the data the day afterward, and you may find something like this, which is a huge muscle artifact. Conversely, if you can see real-time EEG responses, you can already notice from single trials that you have a muscle artifact, so you can adjust TMS parameters to reduce it. And when you look at 20 trials average, you really want to prevent the occurrence of this situation where you deliver hundreds of trials, then you go home the day after, you analyze the data, and you don't find anything significant in the post-stimulus period compared to baseline. So in this case, it means that you are not effectively stimulating the cortex. By looking at data in real time, you can immediately realize you are in this situation, so you have still time to adjust TMS parameters, increase intensity, change site, change orientation, to improve the signal-to-noise ratio. Okay.
Thank you, Silvia. So, let's start, guys.
No, you go back to the app.
So, we now start to target left premotor cortex.
We have selected an anatomical target on the MRI. We can enlarge this so you can see better. So we want to stimulate the left premotor cortex, left frontal cortex. So we decide a target, we decide an orientation, which is orthogonal to the gyrus locally. And then we set stimulation intensity, in this case based on the estimated induced electric field, which is about 100 volt per meter. So if we deliver a single pulse in this condition, please, we do not see anything because we have the pulse artifact, which is huge. You see all those vertical bars, let's say. But since we are using an EEG amplifier that is compatible with TMS, it has a high sampling rate, 5 kilohertz sampling rate, the duration of this artifact is very small. So we can just, flatten a time window which is from -2 to +5 milliseconds around the pulse, and it's gone. So we just lose a few 4 or 5 milliseconds after the pulse, and then the signal is clean. Okay, now we leave this feature on so that we can see online the single trial response to TMS. So just clear and restart again. Yeah. Okay, you see that we are looking at the data in common physical reference. So the reference in this case is put on the forehead. And the data, which is shown here, is very much correlated across channels because you have only one reference site. It's better to look at the data in average reference because in that way we can better estimate the topographical distribution of the potentials. Okay, so we keep the average reference display and we can go on with the pulses. Because in this case, we do not see any relevant artifact, right? We don't, if there was a muscle artifact, we should have expected a large biphasic waveform over the lateral aspects of the head. So in this case, we were quite lucky, so we can try to see whether the EEG response to TMS, when we average more trials, is significant compared to baseline. Okay. Okay. Now we are delivering a few pulses. We go up. Wait, this is a very important thing. You see this huge alpha rhythm on the back? The subject was eyes closed. We have to remember to have our subject eyes open. Well, in this case, this was we spotted her. Okay.
Eyes open condition, I heard?
Yes, eyes open.
Wasn't sure. Yeah.
Sure.
Try not to move this electrode.
Okay, so we can restart.
Okay, ready?
Yeah. Oh wait, I should better. Here there is a very nice feature that allows you, once you select a point that you want to stimulate, the stimulator automatically stops if you are off target. And this is very important because now we have a very compliant subject, but in other cases the subject can move a bit, so you have to keep on adjusting the position while you stimulate. Thank you, Alex. Okay, here we have the average of about 20 trials, so we can start looking at that. So you see that he can reach the same spot.
So you can see here, these are the channels under the stimulator, okay? And you can see that there are early components here that are larger compared to the ones we record on the other side. We are very close to the midline to avoid muscle artifacts. Maybe in a while we can show how a muscle artifact looks like in this graphic user interface, but you can appreciate how you can already see in real time the response, the EEG response to the TMS, which is asymmetrical, not so much because you are close to the midline. Again, now in a while we will show you also a lateral, more lateral cortical spot, but after how many trials?
51.
Okay, 50 trials, it can be also a bit better if you are more stable with the coil on the head, and this is just a drift, okay, of I don't know, a few trials out of these 50. But anyway, you see that the TEP is acquiring the final waveform, but most importantly, you are pretty sure that you are effectively stimulating the cortex. Yes, here you are.
We have 100 milliseconds pre-stimulus and 400 milliseconds post-stimulus. So the stimulus occurs around here. So this is baseline and this is post-stimulus. Here you have early in time large components that are invoked. Consider that this is just trias average. There are no filters, nothing. It's just raw trias average without any automatic rejection, really nothing. That's why you see this, but and we can measure in real time the amplitude and latency of these first components. So for example, if I go here, I'm at 19.2 milliseconds and 2 microvolts of amplitude. And if I move here, I am at 30 milliseconds, so about 10, 15 milliseconds peak-to-peak latency difference, and minus 6.3 microvolts. So we have a response which is peak-to-peak about 8 microvolts. This is channel F1. If we go and zoom on channel F2, which is the homologous contralateral channel, we have similar latencies. So we have 17 and 29 milliseconds. And the amplitude peak-to-peak is 2.6 and minus 2.5. So it's 4.5 microvolts. It's half. So it means that we have a local early response close to the stimulation site in the first 50 milliseconds, which is larger on the left where we are stimulating and smaller on the right where we are not stimulating. If we zoom on different channels, such as, I don't know, this one, or better, this one, which is C1, you see there is something that seems evoked in the post-stimulus, but the amplitude is much smaller because we are going far away from the stimulation site. And indeed, we have even a bit larger components slightly later, between 28 and 46 milliseconds. So just...
Yeah, great. So, I would suggest to show how a muscle artifact looks like. So, we're a bit lateral.
Yep.
Sorry, which lecture is on the way?
So it's right over F1, so right here.
Yeah,
I
we're
guess something
stimulating
like
here.
FC1 and C3, like an M1 as well.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to go like here, okay?
Sure.
And do you, when you are saying you want to optimize, do you check for the early component or the amplitude?
Both. And that's not enough. Early components under the coil Of course, at the end, you will have also reliable idea of the signal to noise ratio, but this is after several trials, not just 50, but 150 to 100. And then the response must be asymmetric. So if you have something central, and maybe not very early, but around 100, 200 milliseconds, you're pretty sure that you are not effective on the cortex, and maybe the noise masking is not working well, or as Matteo was recalling me a few minutes ago, if you stimulate the muscle, you can have some discomfort from the subject, and you can have, I don't know, saliency-related components, or even pain-related components. You don't want that. You want just the response of the cortex to TMS, and not some other collateral stimulations you can have besides TMS. Did I answer? Okay.
And since this is re-reference to common average, right?
Yes.
Considering all channels.
Now considering all channels,
So,
but if
to
I'm not
average
happy,
Average.
Yeah.
yeah, if
So
I'm
if
not
you, what
happy,
if you have a bad channel
we can select it and deactivate it
online?
online. So I remove this channel, it's gone. It's not only gone from the display, but also from the computation of the average reference.
Great.
And what was the stimulation intensity right now?
It's 48% of the maximal stimulator output with about 100 volt per meter estimated by the navigation software on the cortex.
How many averages normally in your studies, in this kind of studies, you take?
We do at least 200 trials, at least, usually 200, 250.
Do you keep it in a single session,
Yeah.
or
It's about a 10-minute session. We stimulate once every 2 seconds, 2.3 seconds with a jittered interstimulus interval, usually.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask exactly that. It seemed like your inter-trial interval was relatively short, right? So 2 seconds. And I'm worried about the additive effect. So over the course of those 200 pulses now, where you're doing essentially low frequency RTMS at this point, right? Change over time because you're taking an average, but the reality is if you look at the trajectory, my guess is that it's going to be changing over time.
I can answer.
Yeah.
I have a data set where, and now it's only ready, and I got exactly the same questions by the referee. So I'm using the same interval.
Which
I
is 2
compare.
seconds, not 1.
Okay.
Now we are using one
Even
because
low
Even shorter,
frequency,
even
essentially,
shorter.
yeah.
And I compared the first 55% to the last one, and there was no difference. So we might assume that there is no
Carry over. We are stimulating always below 1 Hz because we know that 1 Hz is affecting cortical signals.
Yeah, but it's jitter, so.
yes,
Jitter too,
it's
but
0.5
the
jitter.
criticism is right actually. But
Well, I mean, I wouldn't call it crit. I'm just curious because I think, a long time ago, we did a similar thing and we did see a difference, but I don't recall exactly.
At
when.
0.5 Hz.
I'm sorry?
At 0.5 Hz.
Again, I don't recall exactly the.
Because we
This makes some difference. I mean, frequency is kind of a critical factor
Yes.
to reduce platform change.
at 2 seconds interstimulus interval, we performed a study in which we compared, several sessions performed at the beginning of the day, after, and we could not find any significant difference. I can provide you with a reference. Just ask.
but also, I mean, 10-minute session, there's like a jitter in subject vigilance. I mean, we saw that in many trials, the alpha is like really going crazy. So how you control like this, kind of spontaneous subject floating during the 10 minutes? And in 10 minutes, I would sleep off.
Especially with the low frequency.
Well, you have two ways to control for that. First, look at the subject. It's trivial, but you must do it. Okay? And we immediately realized that she was eyes closed, and now it's the second feature. Look at the BG, because as soon as the subject falls asleep, this is very well known, alpha rhythm disappears and the vigilance is going. So these two things are, and thank you for the question, for pointing out this. These are very important things to look at during the experiment. You just don't, bad habit is to put the coil there and stimulate it, okay? No, you have to carefully look at the subject, at the spontaneous EG, and so on and so forth.
Like the muscle aspect, right? Just to show.
Yeah. Yes, yes.
Was the next question, right? So I just cleared the average here. So the software is not saving anything. We didn't save it, but in any case, it's not saving anything. It just displays the data. So the raw data are saved on the hard disk by the amplifier, whatever it is, by the proprietary software of the amplifier. So we are not altering any raw data. Then you start from scratch with the analysis.
Related to what we were saying before, now there are some corollary but crucial features that you must look at during the experiment. For instance, if the subject is startling at every stimulus, you have a blink time lock with the stimulation. Okay? This subject is instructed, educated to be a subject. I'm joking. She's a neuroscientist, she knows what to do, but with I don't know, lay people, they are coming to the lab, they are volunteers, you have to instruct them, you have to look at them, they don't blink, they don't feel discomfort, and so on and so forth, okay? Second, maybe at the beginning of the recording, there was a clear decay artifact. We can reproduce it at the end of the session because we can't go back after that. You can have channels that are not so clean in the very early components, but the signal is affected by quite large decay artifact, which comes from the charging of the gel, of the net, of the hair, and so on and so forth. Okay? So in this case, since we are short on time, all these conditions were controlled before, but we have ways to maybe at the end of the session to show that things can be worse, and you have to carefully check that all these things are working well. Okay.
So basically, Mario and Silvia here are showing that this graphical user interface is super useful to check if you have a response in real time. It's also useful to check if you have artifacts. And as a TMS SG operator, you're able to minimize the artifacts in real time during the recording. Not after during the processing, but here, while before starts the recording of your EG. That's the best way that you have to be sure that what your recording is genuine and is coming from the brain.
We are going to show you an example now that you see in real time muscle artifact. Okay.
Just a technical question also. If you would have a line experience, would you see it immediately also there?
The channel that was removed was largely affected by line noise. Did you see that? We can put it back. We removed because it goes into the average reference.
My point is you see it immediately. It's not that.
You see it immediately, and you have the control, in this case, of the brain vision, which is the visualization software of the signal. You can see it's not why we go with this graphic user interface, because this software is not designed to control for TMS evoked potential, but only for the spontaneous EG you are recording. And you can see it also there. So we go for looking for muscle, which is not.
Yep.
This is a lateral channel, which is TP9. It's, you see that if you keep that very bad channel within the computation of the average reference, all the channels are altered by this. But if I simply inactivate this channel, so also the average computation is reperformed and we get some. So
You can go also not so lateral, Alex, but more closer to the midline. Yeah. Okay. And we'll go up and test.
Oh, I can't see the head tracker.
You can't see.
Oh, no, you can. There we go. Good.
Wow, this is a perfect subject.
No muscle.
She has no muscle.
well,
Yeah,
there is
is.
a bit of muscle artifact, but just a bit. Maybe we could move to this more.
Yeah, but can you show how the response is, how are the early components affected or can be affected by that?
So, here we have an example. The muscle artifact has a biphasic rapid shape, which can be followed by a slow return to baseline if it is very big. In this case, it's small, so you just have this fast up and down with.
Okay, so now we changed the cortical spot.
And how do you deal with that?
Okay, that's a good question. So, you can keep in, if you are interested in one specific cortical spot, you start rotating the.
Do you want to rotate in this case?
What? Yeah.
So,
We're going to do the same thing. Just get a rotation, see if I can eliminate the muscle artifact.
I give you the repeat and you
Yep.
So remember this kind of response, that he keeps the same target and rotates the angle clockwise or as you wish. Wait that I clear the average. Okay. Sorry. There is still a bit of muscle, so this rotation was not enough. So I would clear the average and then ask you to rotate a bit more.
Oh, the same way or the other way?
Try the same way, yeah. Since we don't know what's the main direction of muscular fibers. There is still muscle artifact. So if you rotate like here and you orient the coil in this way, I clear the average. Now it's better. You still have some, but only in a couple of channels. So maybe this is the right direction to rotate. And you can play a bit and improve the situation.
Can I look for a better muscle? I know which is not our aim.
Yeah.
Okay, the one on the back.
Yes.
Is the larger artifact.
So
One of the posterior channels here. Yeah.
this one.
Yes.
This is larger.
Okay,
So
now I rotate.
you are rotating, so I clear the average. Do you want me to give the repeat?
Yeah.
This is smaller.
Yes. It's virtually gone now. You see?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you remove the noise cancelling so we can see the audio?
The noise masking?
The earphones.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
yes. It's at the end of the.
Can you remove it so we can?
Sure.
At the end of the
Let's
day.
do it now.
Okay.
Let's do it now.
Right. Simple as that.
Something that
Excellent.
I would like to say is that Mario here rotated the rotation that Mario applied to the coil with a slight rotation of the coil. I mean,
I can't see.
That's
when
why
you
it is,
want to deal with the muscle,
Facciamo prima
you have to rotate the coil just a few degrees.
because we are
It's not
running
a
out of
rotation
time.
of 90 degrees or more. Okay,
Go.
just a slightly rotation of the coil can improve a lot your signal, can reduce a lot the muscle activity. And as Mario said, for the subject, this is much more better because the subject is not able to feel that anymore. And the feeling, time lost feeling of the muscle can be reflected in the both response.
So what's the general rule with the muscle fibers and the direction of the electric field?
There is a nice paper by Tuomas Multanen, 2015, which is a nice paper. There is a nice paper by Tuomas Multanen from the Finnish group that shows safe areas where you don't have muscle. But if you want to go there, there are rules to make the main axis of the induced electric field not parallel to the muscle fibers. Of course, you don't know where the muscle fibers are and how they are oriented. So that's why you play with the coil. That's the only way to do that. You play with the coil, and online you see that you are not effective on the muscle fibers, but not in this case, we don't have time, but you can be still effective on the cortex. Okay, now, since you asked, it was a good question, we can go without noise masking, okay? Clear average. We do this sham in a more realistic way to touch the skull with the coil.
Takes more time, more trials to see the auditory response when it's smaller.
Yeah, go on the central electrodes. Yes, there is already a 100 p, 200.
This is 80, and this is 164, if I see correctly. Yeah. Yeah. This is 108 milliseconds, and this is 8 milliseconds.
It has a central topography. Okay, it's not really central. Based on the literature, but you could see it online. You have a positive spot here, blob here, and like a blue crown here. That's the topography that tells you that you are actually recording an auditory vocal potential. and it doesn't relate with the coil position. Okay.
Does your software also have the topography display, or is it just the channel?
We
Yeah,
are
but-
start implementing.
Yeah,
It's not optimized yet.
it's a work in progress.
It's a work in
Maybe
progress,
Harry
but-
can answer to that, but yeah.
Yeah, have you found any
No,
major benefits?
it's not
using
yet. Really.
Any, like a foam or a spacer to reduce the bone conducting out to
Okay, not spacer, because this of course will increase the coil to cortex distance, but if you still see these kind of components, maybe the bone conduction is so effective that you can put a thin layer of foam under the coil. This can reduce the vibration and the bone conduction. Okay.
So but if you would stimulate laterally, okay, then you would have a strongly lateralized N100 component. Meaning under the coil there is nothing, well, very small on the other side. Would you say it's predominantly auditory?
No, if it's under the coil, it's coming from that cortical module that you are stimulating. Okay?
Right, so topography is important when you
Yes.
evaluating the
Crucial, not
auditory
important. I would say crucial, because there is no physiological reason to have under the coil something coming from the auditory system. Okay, so what you see also at late latencies under the coil, it is coming from the excitation of that corticothalamic module. Otherwise, in case of, I don't know, somatosensory stimuli, you would have a contralateral response, not an ipsilateral, homolateral response. And in case of an auditory evoked potential, you have central topographies. Yeah. But, important, I briefly shown that if you stimulate, if you are interested in studying the M1 motor cortex, okay, you can go above threshold for MEPs, okay, say 120% of the motor threshold. So you are evoking a twitch or a muscle contraction, and this is reverberating in the cortex as a somatosensory stimulus. So in this case, you can have a lateralized component which is coming from the periphery. Okay. By controlling with the graphic user interface, you can say, look, I want to study M1, okay, below threshold, but I'm sure that I'm evoking, I'm effective on the cortex because there I can see an evoked potential. If we have, I don't know whether we have time or not, we are running out of time, but we can show another spot on the cortex, then we conclude this live session, which is a bit more lateral. We are going on the sensory motor cortex, okay?
I don't know where the headphones are anymore. One of many wires, thank you. Oh, thanks.
So are you logged, is the EMG connected to the system so you can see the EMG?
It can be, yeah. Not right now, but there is an integrated EMG system. Yes. And you can visualize it in the same on the same screen. Sorry.
So can you move your wave? Right now it's time locked to TMS stimulation, but as you were saying, when you have the muscle movement, so can you time lock it to the EMG onset? Can you do the averaging differently? When you make
You have
zero to time movement onset?
the trigger is going both to EEG and EMG, the same trigger, and you can see online whether you have MEPs while recording TEPs. Yes, you can do that.
Can you? I'll go for it.
Okay, sorry. Can you keep that channel, Silvio? Because there was a question about also decay artifacts and how do they look like, and that is a decay artifact. You see, it's not very long-lasting, but it's annoying. And if you are spotting there, then a large part of your response, say 20, for now I don't have the cursor, but 30 milliseconds can be affected by this decay artifact.
Yeah, this is 45.
Perfect. Most likely, that's a problem of impedance. Now it's 45 minutes, even more, because we ended the preparation at 1 hour ago, 1 hour and 15 minutes ago. But you go back on that channel and you make again the impedance at a good. Yeah, right. And you can check on the with the brain vision whether you are effective in improving the contact.
Now I'll temporarily inactivate the channel.
Okay, can you show that row? Not the one now. No, the one just in front of that. Okay. Okay. Now again.
Larry. Here.
Here you can see that you have a very large response here, also at late lattices, okay? Here I think 200 milliseconds, even more.
So this is 105, and this is 226.
Yeah. And it's larger here, where the coil is, and virtually is not present here, or much more on that side. So there is no one physiological reason to have a late component there where you are stimulating, given that we control for auditory stimulation and for discomfort of the subject, muscle activation, and so on and so forth. So this is coming from that corticothalamic module that you are stimulating. Okay.
This question about the impedances. Can you just check the impedances before the beginning of each subsequent session?
We do that.
You do that?
Yeah. And we monitor that the impedances are still good during the session. Okay? Okay.
Yeah.
I think we covered. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you all for your.